What are artboards in Affinity? How and when might you want to use artboards? And then what are some of the secret advantages that come with artboards? And if we use artboards, how are we going to export all those designs at once? Well, we're going over all of that in this video, so let's get to it. When you're first launching a project in Affinity, that's when you're going to have your first chance to add artboards to a project underneath this document settings menu, because underneath here we have this little button here where we can turn artboards on and off. So I've gone ahead and I've launched two different projects, exactly the same, except for one of them I had this checked on and one of them I had checked off. So what does it actually mean when we add an artboard to a project? Let's jump in and start to figure that out. So here's a project I launched without artboards, and we'll notice the layers menu here is totally empty. If I jump over to the project I did launch with artboards, we notice suddenly now we have this top layer that's called Artboard 1, and we see it has this pound symbol to the left here, and we'll also see to the top left here it says Artboard 1. Okay, so that's our first clue. We do have artboards here, but we're gonna have to delve a little farther to understand exactly what's going on here and the differences that are gonna come into play when you're working in a project with artboards versus without artboards. So to better illustrate the differences we're going to see between artboards and not artboards, I've gone ahead and added some content to these documents. So this one here, this is the one that is not an artboard, but then over on my other artboard, my other project that is an artboard, I've added the same content. Of course, I've changed this to say artboard and it says not an artboard on the other one. But so the one that is not an artboard here, if we look at this, we'll just have three layers here. We'll notice under the artboard project here, everything is sort of grouped together here. So this is acting a lot like a group where we can twirl this down, twirl it open, and see all the contents that are on this artboard. Now, let me zoom out on each of these projects. So I'm going to tap Z to get my zoom tool and just click a couple times so we can see. And I'll do the same on this project here that's not an artboard. So get Z for my zoom tool and this alt click to zoom out a couple times. Now, let me show you something else. So this is not an artboard. If I were to grab my select tool here, I'm just going to click on one of these objects here. So I have the blue circle and I drag this off my artboard and then I release it. It disappears. Now I'm still seeing it here. I can click on it and it's there, but I can't see that when it's off the artboard when I don't have it selected. When it's selected, I can see the outline. And if I wanted to, I could drag it back on, but let's just leave it off for a moment. Now let's go over to our artboard and do the exact same thing that we just did on this not an artboard. So I'm going to come over here. And we're going to grab the blue circle here. So, oops, didn't mean to zoom in. Let's zoom back out. Let's grab that select tool. Let's grab this blue circle and move it off and release it. When I release it, it stays visible. So when you're working with an artboard like this, you can drag something off the artboard. And I've often heard this area beyond the artboard called the pasteboard. It doesn't matter. The part of your design that's not the actual board, when you take something off, you'll notice right here, it's no longer in the group here. So it's moved outside of this Artboard 1 group. You notice how we twirl it open and close and we see it, we don't see it. If I were to drag this circle and put it back on, you see how it moves back into this artboard. I could move it off, it moves out of the artboard. If I wanted it to disappear without moving it, if I just dropped it into here, we'll see it's back on the artboard and now it's behaving the same as the other one because we've moved it in such a way that it's off screen here, but it is on this artboard. So if I wanted to bring it back onto the artboard, we see it, but then when I move it off again, it's going to disappear and move up above the artboard. So by default, things that are not on the artboard, you can still see them on screen. So you can move things off your artboard and maybe you're going to come back to them later. You want to have them, so you possibly are going to bring them into your design, but you're just going to store them over here. You still will see them unless you specifically do it that way where we drop it back in the artboard like this without moving it. Okay, so something to understand, because this is one way that artboards are going to act a little different than, a design that's not an artboard. But so other than that, maybe that's not a big deal. We're not seeing much of a difference yet between artboards and a project that doesn't have artboard. And a big reason for that is because in this artboard project right now, so far we have one single artboard. And you really probably wouldn't use artboards if you were just doing one single design, because the whole idea is when you want to work on multiple designs at one time. So now with this project open here, if I come in under my Vector Studio and I find this artboard tool right here Then suddenly when I click on that, we'll notice we get a plus icon on each side of my design here. And if I go ahead and click this one on this side here, then it's going to add a new artboard on this side of the design. Now, just because where the circle was in space there, it showed up partly on this board. But of course, I can come in here and grab that circle now, and we'll see if I twirl open Artboard 2, this blue circle is on Artboard 2. Now I can reposition it, so I could again come up here and click on that circle. I could drag it outside of my design. Now it's not on either of these artboards. I could move it back to Artboard 1. Now it's on Artboard 1, back to Artboard 2, and it's on Artboard 2. So I could also zoom out here. So let's just zoom out so we could see multiple artboards. Now, whenever you have artboards like this, I've mentioned before, a good trick to know when working in Affinity is if you double click on a layer, it'll zoom and center that layer within the screen. So if I were to double click up here on Artboard 2, suddenly we have Artboard 2 centered. If I double click on Artboard 1, I can see Artboard 1. Of course, if I want to just zoom out, I could hit Z to get my zoom tool. Use the Alt key to go back and forth between zooming in and zooming out. So I'm going to sort of hold down Alt to get to that zoom out, and then just reposition here. So again, you can view both artboards at once. If you want to zoom to a particular artboard, you can zoom to a particular artboard. So this is the idea though with artboards. Usually you can have an artboard open when you're working on multiple designs. So maybe you want to try out multiple variations of one design, or maybe you want to do multiple designs just where you're working on similar content. So let's just say you're going to use similar assets. So if I had this blue circle off screen, but I knew it was an asset I was going to use in this project, so I might drag in my assets like this and then hold on the Alt key. I can make a copy there. I can make a copy into this design. So really quickly, I could use similar assets in multiple projects. Here's another example of artboards here, just where I was coming up with logo versions. And so maybe I want to create different artboards just to experiment around with these different logos and see them all at once on screen. So artboards are really powerful when you want to start to work on multiple versions of a design, or maybe different designs that are all using the same similar assets, a similar theme. Anytime you just want to work on multiple designs together like this. Now, in a prior tutorial in this Affinity Learning series, we talked about the Layout Studio and how the Layout Studio is great for multi-page design. So I just wanted to point out the distinction between that and artboards, because really this Layout Studio is great when you're creating long form content, so cohesive articles. So you're working on different designs on different pages, but you're going to have content like maybe like certain headers, certain layouts, page numbers that are going to sort of want to appear across multiple pages, and that's where you can really use these master pages up here to your advantage. So there is definitely a difference between working in this Layout Studio and just working on artboards. Artboards are going to be more when you're working with distinct designs. They may be different versions of each other, but it's not one long form article. So long form article where you want to sort of build out the layout, that's where you want to use that Layout Studio. But if you're just doing different variations of one design, or themes where you want to work on different designs together because they're using similar content, or for whatever reason they're part of the same campaign, that's when you would turn to artboards and not that Layout Studio. So I just want you to understand that distinction between Layout Studio and where it fits a need, and then artboards and how they're going to fit a different need. Now let me return back for 1 second to this project where I don't have any artboards, because I just wanted to show you here, if at any point in time you're working in a project where you started it without artboards and then you're like, ooh, actually I want to work on multiple designs at once. I do want artboards. Well, all you would have to do to add artboards and to convert this to a document with artboards is just like before, come under this Vector Studio, find this artboard tool, and then suddenly when we do that, as soon as we add an artboard here, now suddenly we know, we'll notice that that new artboard becomes Artboard 2, and this other design, which previously wasn't on artboard, suddenly it becomes an artboard as well. So again, if you want to convert something from a project in Affinity that doesn't have artboards to artboards, just come find this artboard tool, add an artboard, and then suddenly you're going to have artboards in that project. So I'm just going to return back to this one now, since we don't need to be working on both of these. And let's talk a little bit more about the artboard tool and the different options here for adding artboards, resizing artboards, positioning artboards, because that's going to be important if you want to stay organized here. Work on different pages, have an organized layout here, perhaps have pages that are different sizes. I say pages, but designs that are different sizes, because remember, pages would be more of like that long form content. Here we're talking about distinctive designs. So different design sizes in here. How would we do that? So let's learn about all the options we have here under this artboard tool. So you saw how we could click any of these plus icons to just to very quickly add a artboard on that side of the design. So boom, add an artboard up there, just click on that. But you can also just click and drag anywhere on sort of the empty part of your screen and drag out whatever size artboard you want. Now, as you do that, of course, you may not have total size control, so maybe a better way to do it is actually to come down and use this transform window. And if for some reason you don't see that, let's just say this is twirled closed, or actually let me just close it completely. Let's close that transform group. Now you probably do have that transform panel, but just in case you don't, here on Windows, you can come in under any of these menus here. So use this little down arrow on any of these menus here, and underneath that, you can then go to panels, and then you could come down here until you found transform, and you could just tick it back on. So you can see I can tick it on, I can tick it off. Now, this sort of customized menu, you can also get to under the three dots. And over here, I don't think on Mac, unless it came out on a recent update, you have this option. So on the Mac, you might have to come up here into these menus. And again, it might not be exactly the same, but somewhere under these menus, you're gonna find the ability to turn that panel back on. So here on Windows, I would come under Window, under General. That's where that transform checkbox is. Boom, I can turn that transform panel back on. So just find that option, make sure you have transform here, because then with the transform here, then I have the ability to come in here and with any artboard selected, so make sure you're selected on the artboard top layer, so not one of the assets down here, because if you're on an individual asset, then this transform is going to apply to the particular asset that you're working on. So notice how it changes as I click on different elements. So you want to be on the artboard itself. So here's artboard 4. So if I was up here, and let me just twirl this one closed, let's find artboard 4. Here's artboard 4. Then I could come down here and use these numbers to affect its position and its size. So the X, Y are just the positional coordinates. So in other words, if I wanted to bump this over, instead of 10,045, let's make that 1100, and we'll see it slide to the right slightly. So that's just the XY position. Now you can also click on the artboard itself. So notice when I'm outside of the artboard, I have this cursor. When I move on the artboard, it changes to this move thing, and then you can just pick it up and drag it, and it's gonna sort of position itself here. And of course, if you have snapping turned on up here, I had it turned off for a second, but if you have it turned on, then suddenly it's gonna start snapping to the bounds of other artboards, other objects you may have on your pasteboard here. So that's something to know as well. But if I wanted to come in here and manually put in the exact size I want, then I could use this width down here, or the height. So let's make it a little wider. Let's make it 2,500 pixels wide. So I could do that, hit enter. It's going to go ahead and apply. Now, because I had the lock icon here, it also adjusted the height because it's keeping those in proportion if you have this lock icon on. So that's just something else to keep in mind. And again, you can just click right on it. You can drag it around, position it wherever you need to. Now let's look at a few practical examples now, just so we can learn a few more things about artboards, some smart workflow things to keep in mind when you're working with artboards so you can work efficiently with artboards, and then also just gain an understanding for what sorts of projects might be the case when artboards would be really helpful. So let's take a look back at this example. This is an Affinity project where I just have different artboards to store different variations of my logo that I'm playing around with. So it makes sense in this instance to use artboards and to have artboards to be the same size and all this. But of course, as you get more and more artboards and more layers within those artboards, it's going to be a little harder to stay organized over here, especially if you don't name your layers, name your artboards, I should say. And you can see how all these artboards are just named things like artboard 2, artboard 1, and it'll even just keep the exact same name when you copy an artboard or when you create a new one. So you really need to come in here and rename your artboards. Now you can do that two different ways. You can come up here to the top left and actually click on the name in the top left, double click, and it's going to bring up this little dialog right here. So I could call this logo version 1. And so that's going to make it where it gets renamed over here. And that's going to make it a lot more easy to understand when I click on something, what project, what artboard I'm working on. Because if I just leave it artboard 1, I might be able to tell from the little thumbnail if it's different enough what artboard it is. But otherwise, it could be really confusing. So renaming your artboards, just a good practice. And again, you can do it by clicking on the upper left, but you can also just come in here and click on the artboard itself over here. So this one here says artboard 1, but let's see which artboard that is. I'm actually going to click on it so I can see it get highlighted over here. Okay, this is artboard 1, but I want it to be called logo version 2. So I could double click right up here to get in here and change the name this way, logo version 2. And again, it's going to change it here. It's going to change it up here. So renaming your artboards, you can either double click and edit here, or you can double click and edit here over in the layers menu. Either way, this is going to be a good practice and a smart practice just for staying organized, especially as you build out more and more artboards, because by default, when you copy an artboard or when you use this plus icon, for example, if I do this one here, plus icon right here, it's going to build this one. Well, I called it Artboard 3. So this one actually did give it another name here. But again, Artboard 1, Artboard 2, Artboard 3, you can give it better names than that. And just to show you, if you copy an artboard, so if I were to come up here and let's just go to this Artboard 1 right here, if I were to actually be on the artboard itself, the whole group, I can right click, I can choose duplicate, and it did actually duplicate that artboard, but it gave it the same Artboard 1 name, and it also just put it directly on top of the other artboard, which may not be immediately obvious and could lead to confusion. So I would just grab the move tool here and then grab that whole artboard and slide it down, okay? But that's one of the reasons why I tend to not just right click and choose duplicate. Instead, maybe I'd have the artboard selected like this, and then I'd hold down the Alt or Option key. And just like you can duplicate elements and objects this way, you can just hold down the Alt or Option key when you have something selected and drag out a copy. And that's just gonna be a better way. That way it doesn't get positioned over top of something. But then even using this method, you'd want to go back in and you want to rename it. So just pay attention that you have these tricks for renaming things, for copying things, and positioning things, because it might make sense to duplicate something like this. If you're just going to make a subtle change rather than starting with a blank thing and copy and paste, the duplicate does make sense, but do it in a way where you're not going to lose track of things so that you can stay organized in your whole project here. Now, something else of note, you can copy elements between artboards here, and since these artboards are the same size, it is going to maintain the relative position of those elements. So, for example, if I came up here and I wanted to grab this group that has the blue door, I could click on that and then Control C to copy that element. Then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click on this artboard to select it and use Control V. And we'll notice that the door gets placed at the exact same position in this document on this artboard as it does up here on this artboard. So that's helpful to know, and that's a good way to very easily move something from one artboard to another artboard, even to multiple other artboards, and maintain that positioning. Let's move on now and let's look at another practical example. So I'm going to come up here, click on this A just to get back to that home screen. I'll use plus here, and I'm going to start with this 1920 by 1080 here. But what I'm thinking is maybe I want to have a set of artboards that I'm going to use for a social media campaign for one particular project I've done, maybe some YouTube video that I recorded, and I want to have sort of marketing assets for various channels. So maybe I want to do a YouTube thumbnail, but maybe I also want a Facebook post, maybe I want an Instagram post. So it might make sense and save time if I set those up as an artboards and bring in the assets and sort of create all those graphics all at once. So let's look at that as an example, and we'll find a few other things you need to understand here about artboards, because there also is one sort of weird thing that doesn't work quite the way it should. But we're going to talk about that in a second. So I'll go ahead and launch this now. And again, I could turn on artboards here, but it's not going to matter if I do, because once I do that here, I'm still going to be able to come in here and come over to the Vector Studio and choose this tool right here. And then I'm going to be able to come in here and convert this project into a project that has artboards. Now, let me just hit Z to get the zoom tool and then the Alt key to zoom out a little bit, just so I can see more of the screen here. Now back to this artboard tool, we know I can click this plus icon to add a new artboard. We also know I can move around here by holding down the space bar and just sliding around. And then I also can just drag out artboards of any size I want, like this. Now notice when I did that, I actually lost the existing artboard, and so that's sort of a quirk. Let me hit Control Z to undo that. If you add an artboard like this, it's just going to add another artboard and convert that initial one to an artboard. But if you drag one out first, then it's actually going to delete that original design. So it's kind of inconsistent in how it works, but that's just something to be aware of. And then of course, once you have something on screen like this, you could come in here and use the move tool and click on something and sort of adjust the sizes this way. Now I'm going to zoom out once again. When you have things of different size like this, and then you're on the artboard tool, the size of a new artboard when you use this plus icon is going to depend what the plus is adjacent to. So if I click adjacent to this, one of these plus icons, it's just going to duplicate the size of that artboard. The same is true of this. This artboard is a different size. If I use the plus icon, it's going to build out an artboard of the same size as that. Okay, so different things to understand here about how it chooses the new artboard size. Now really, what would be nice if we could just tell exactly the size of the artboard we want as we create it. And if we go to the artboard tool, there is this drop down here. So I have the artboard here, and then it has this drop down here where underneath here there are some presets. But this is very inconsistent in how it works, and I think right now this is part of the interface that needs to be improved, and I'm going to show you what I mean. So if I choose one of these like iPhone 17, it's going to tell me the dimensions here, but it doesn't have any kind of insert button. This is kind of meaningless. But with some of these here, if I come down to iPad, then suddenly I get the insert artboard, and I can put it in an artboard, and when I do, we don't see where it is, but here it is over here. It used the exact dimensions of that specific device. However, I can't come over here under this tool and choose this custom size, because when I do, if I type something out here, it does not give me that insert artboard button, which is why I think this part of the interface now, the contextual menu, when you're using this artboard tool, as of my time of recording this, it's very inconsistent, because for some of these here, it will allow you to insert an artboard like this one does here. So I can do that. I can zoom out. We can see now it added the relative size for this one here. But again, just very, very inconsistent. What should happen here is you should be able to type in the exact size you want under this custom and then have the insert button. But as of right now, it does not work that way. So right now, I think your best bet is to just click the plus icon to create a new artboard. And even if it's not the size you want, then come down here and then use this transform option. And underneath the width and height, that's where I would come in and add the exact pixel dimensions that you need. Right now, I think that's going to be the most consistent way to create new artboards of the size you want. Okay, so I added a whole bunch here, but I'm going to hit Control Z to backtrack through these, because of course these did not turn out the way I wanted. So just Control Z to backtrack through these different ones I created, and now I have two on screen. So now let's come in and work from here. So currently both these artboards here are 1920 by 1080 pixels in size, and if you click on any of those, you can see that down here in this sort of transform panel. So I'm going to come in here and just click on this first one here, and let's call this YouTube thumbnail. So I'm just going to use YT for YouTube, and we'll call this YouTube thumbnail, just because now I'm going to start to name the artboards the way I want them. Now I'm going to click on the second artboard, and it's not the size I want. I'm actually going to flip this size, so let me just turn this off, and let me just say 1080, and then we'll come down here for the height, and let's make it 1920 in height. And we'll go ahead and hit enter. So I've resized this one the way I wanted to. And let's come in here and let's just call this Pinterest, because maybe I'm creating a graphic for Pinterest. And let's go ahead and create a couple more sizes here just to represent the different social media assets we're going to want to create. So I'll come in here, grab the artboard tool. Let's just put another one over here. But again, I'm going to go down here and let's make this one 940 pixels by 788. Go ahead and hit enter. This one will come up here and we're going to click to change the name, and we'll call this one FB post for Facebook posts. So we have another one. Let's do one more. And again, I can add it anywhere I want. Let's put it down here. And this one, we're going to come in here. So for this one, we're going to put in 1080 by 1350. So 1350, hit enter. And again, it's overlapping, but I'll fix that. That's fine. So we'll come in here and we'll just grab it. We'll just pull it down. And this one, again, we're going to click on it, or you can come over here, double click this way, and we'll come in here. And this one, we'll go Control A, and we'll name this one Instapost. So Instagram post, whatever you want to name them, whatever is going to make sense for you. So now I have 4 different artboards in here, each sized and named according to what social media platform I'm going to be creating an asset for. And with this artboard tool selected, if I hover over any of the artboards, I get this move cursor, and then I can sort of reposition these any way I want. I could even come in here and click one, shift click on all of these, and then I have some align tools I could use up here if I wanted to get things spaced, the same. So I could come in here and make sure I sort of clean up how much space is in between them, whatever I want, but you can also just sort of drag them around. So whatever is going to work best for you, whatever is going to be the best use of sort of your work inner space here. And of course you have your zoom key to get to your Z key to get to zoom, and you can zoom in by clicking your mouse wheel. Sometimes if you even have a scroll wheel on your mouse, you can use your scroll wheel to zoom in and out. Whatever you need to do to get things sort of fit in your design window the way you like. And of course you can double click on any of these to jump to that particular artboard. Now don't double click on the name, because then you'll be sort of getting into that rename function, but if you double click on the thumbnail here, that's what's going to let you jump jump from one board to the next very easily. Now, anytime you're working on a project like this with multiple artboards, there's lots of ways you could do this. You could start creating one of these assets and bringing in different things, and then use those elements and things you bring in for the other designs as well. Or you could just bring lots of elements onto your pasteboard. In the case of this example here, since I'm sort of coming up with the fly, I actually already created this YouTube thumbnail before. So I actually have that open here, so I might just jump over here to this here. And I want to use these assets to sort of create this version, but for different social media platforms. So let me just actually grab all of these. So I'm going to click one. I'm just going to shift click to grab the other. We'll hit Control C to copy. I don't know if it got all these in between. Let's see. I think maybe this, yeah, that's just open like that. So I think I have all these now using Control C to copy. Again, that would be Command C on Mac. And I'll just jump back over here. But then I don't want to paste initially on this Instagram post artboard. I want to paste on this YouTube thumbnail one, so I'll just double click to get over that. Then I'll hit Control V to paste it like that. Let me actually zoom out a little bit. So let me just grab that zoom and zoom out a little bit. Let's come back to that YouTube thumbnail board. So I'll just click on it again. Let's make sure we get everything selected again. So select everything, make sure I have this selection tool there. And I can just resize it down so it fits nice and neat into there. But then if I want to zoom out a little bit, then I can start getting things recentered. And then I can start to use these elements here on this artboard to build out my other posts as well. So I could grab this mug here, just hit Control C to copy it, click on another artboard, Control V to paste. Let's just bring it in here. And then I could click over here on the Pinterest artboard and hit Control V to paste. But if I go over there, didn't actually see it on there. So let me just come in here, and it looks like maybe it even put it right there. So I think what happens is, you know, it's a little inconsistent copying, pasting when you have different size artboards like this, and you have to clearly be on that artboard. So you can copy and paste, but you can also use this method of clicking on something and then alt dragging to create copies that way. And then of course, once you have something in a new place, you can sort of reposition, resize as needed. So lots of different ways to move around here, and you just have to figure out what is going to work best. So on this YouTube thumbnail board now, maybe I'll try to grab this title, but I don't need everything here. So let me just come down to this green bar here. I'm going to hold down shift and resize and just pull this in. So something like that. And then I'm only really concerned about that layer and then the mastering the pen tool layer, which is this layer right here. So I could control click to grab both of those. Again, I'm just going to use that alt copy trick, and that's alt on Windows. That'd be option on Mac. And I'm just going to drag that out and put it over here. Now for some reason it doesn't seem like it grabbed both layers there. So I might have to find the mastering the pen tool layer, which is this one, and do that as well with my title. Now it grabbed them both. So again, it seems like it's being a little inconsistent, so something to watch out for. You may have to fool around here, but now that I have that, I'll just bring it over here, and I'll bring it over here as well. Here's my logo, I'll bring it over here. I'll bring it over here, I'll bring it over here. So you can then come around and you could obviously come into each board, and now I might want to zoom in. So let's go to this Instagram post board. So that is helpful occasionally just to twirl these closed so you can just see your different artboards a little bit more easily. Let me just double click to center that board here. And now that I'm in here, now I can come in here and I can start to sort of resize things as needed. Now it looks like there's just some extra space here. So I'll have to figure out what's going on, why I have all this extra space here. See, my lesson 5 is still connected. So somehow I got all of these still in here. So sometimes you just have to fool around and see. So I don't actually want this lesson 5, so I can boom, get rid of that. The learning series thing, I can get rid of that. Now I have this sort of condensed down to what I want. So if I click back on the title bar now that's a little bit more of what I want, although I want to get this green layer here and have this be a little bit bigger. So again, I'll hold down the shift, I'll drag that out. So again, takes a little while to figure this out and just work your way through these issues if you're having any issues. But I could come in here and just go ahead, start to work on a particular graphic for this particular social media platform, and then I could go to my other artboards. Again, twirling closed. Let's jump over to the Facebook post. So I'll just double click on that icon here. And so this one here, again, I'm going to size this down as needed. Take this, make this whatever size I want. You can fool around here between pixel view mode and vector view mode if you want to see crisp lines versus a more accurate preview of what you're going to see on a pixel-based viewing device. And so we'll come in here and we'll just resize this up like this. And then let's just go to our Pinterest version. And again, now we're just going to drag this down, center it more at the bottom here. But again, I did bring over by accident the extra assets that I didn't want, so I could delete those out of there just to get things a little bit more consistent. and then come in here and resize again as needed. Something like that. Let's make sure it goes all the way across there. So again, I'm not doing a perfect job with these, and you can see how this sometimes can be a little bit finicky, and you just have to play around and get comfortable with this. But it does let you very easily come in here. Let me do this Facebook post. Let's do that as well. So there we go. You get the idea. I've come in here, I've used some shared assets, and I've used them to create 4 different versions of this for different social media platforms. Now, if you use Canva, you have something like the resize option where it attempts to automate some of this. You have to do some manual cutting and pasting in here, but even in that Canva option, you're going to have to do some repositioning and sizing of different elements for the different versions of the graphics. And of course, this is just one possible way you could use artboards. We already mentioned this logo version where you're just trying different versions of this design. So there are different ways you can use this artboard tool to your advantage. Now, there is another advantage of this artboard tool, which I haven't even mentioned yet. Sort of something that's sort of hidden but can be very helpful, but I want to show you that now as well, and then we'll talk about exporting artboards from a project. So take a look at this project right here. So this is just another Affinity design, where in here I have 4 artboards, and each artboard is holding a slightly different version of this magazine. Well, because I set up these different versions as artboards, that's actually something I can leverage to have more flexibility in some other documents. So let me show you what I mean. So I have this perspective tool file, which is another Affinity file, and I have this magazine cover sort of projected onto this sign, which is at a slight angle. And then I have this mesh warp file here, where same idea, I have this magazine cover or this magazine open page, and I have it sort of warped so it looks like it's fitting on the page. Now, I'm going to have tutorials on this channel about placing images and linked versus embedded images or files, and then also I'm going to have another one on the perspective tool and on the warp tool. But what I want you to understand for this one is how artboards can come into play. So let's start by looking at this perspective tool file here. So this is an Affinity design, and inside this design, I actually went to File, I went to Place, and I placed this version here. I placed this particular file here, this magazine covers, which contains 4 different artboards. And when you place an Affinity project like this into another Affinity project, and it is an artboard project, then it's only going to show one artboard at a time. So by default now, if I have my move tool here and I have this selected, we can see that it's showing artboard 4 right now. But I can just come in here and I can drop in artboard 3. I can drop in artboard 2. I can drop in artboard 1. So this is a very powerful way when you have artboards like this, and then you place that within another document. It's almost like you can reach into that template and pull out any page you want. Now you could also do this with PDFs. If I had all these different pages stored in a PDF and I sort of link that PDF by placing it in another document, then again, I could come and have a drop down like this, and that's how I could access the different pages and bring whatever page I want into that particular design. Now, the other part of this, which again, I'm not going to go over too much in here, but there's a perspective filter being applied to this. So if I turn that off, we can see that that's being warped so that it fits in the sign. And the same thing over here on this mesh warp example. So if I just click over to this mesh warp again, we have this mesh warp underneath here, nested, that is being applied to make this fit into this design. But very easily, again, if I select this with the selection tool, the move tool here, I can come in here. Let me try to make sure I get right on that magazine layer. There it is. I can come in here and say, hey, I want to put in a different one. Let's turn the filter back on so that it gets applied right there. Boom, just like that. Okay. So very powerful to have something stored within artboards, because then we can reach in and grab whatever artboard we want. So you can imagine if I was using my logo, let's just run through the logo example real quick. Let's say we wanted our logo over here on this page. So let's come in here and let's go File. Let's go to Place. And then I'm going to reach in and find that logo version. So Affinity Learning Series, Artboards. This is where I have my logo artboards, all those logos we saw. So I could come in here and I could just place that over here. Now, normally I would spin it at a different angle and make it fit exactly to this page, but for now, let's just go like this. But because this is artboard, I can come in here, and we know we have all those different versions of the logo, so I could come in here and find the version I want very easily. Okay, so you can imagine something like this where you have some reusable assets, but you have different versions you might use. If you store those different versions in an artboard, then suddenly Pretty powerful way you can come in here and place them in a document and then choose whichever version you want. Okay, so another use for artboards that you might want to keep in mind. Okay, so we've done a pretty thorough job of covering artboards, giving you some cool hidden ways you can use artboards. So hopefully you're really starting to get those creative thoughts on how you might use artboards. So I'm about to finish up here, but let me just show you two more quick things. One thing I didn't mention is guides and how they relate to artboards. So with my ruler showing, if I drag out a guide here, you see it's only going to show up down here on this artboard because this is actually the active artboard. So if I click in here on this artboard now and drag out a guide, dragging my rulers, we can see that our artboard, that guide appears on this artboard. But if I zoom out, so let me zoom out here, if I suddenly make another artboard, the active artboard, so let's find a different artboard here, this one here, and so I can't see exactly which one that is because I haven't named these properly. I need to come back and name these properly, but let me turn that on and off here, and we're not seeing that one, so let me find a different one. Okay, so this one up here now, this one is now active. So if I come up here and make this one the active artboard, turn it on and off just to make sure I could drag in another guide up there. The only point I want to make to you here as I drag in the guide is that guides will independently show up on each artboard. So even though I dragged out a vertical guide on this artboard down here, I'm not seeing it up here on this artboard. And when one guide is selected, you're only going to see the guides on that artboard and not on other artboards. But then as I come back here through, start to make these other artboards active, then I can see the guides that exist on those artboards. But dragging that out right there like that, that's not going to put a guide up on a different artboard. So this artboard here doesn't have any guides because I haven't put any on there yet. But if I drag out a guide, now I have a guide on that artboard. So I just want you to keep that in mind, that guides sort of act independently on separate artboards. You're not dragging one guide onto one artboard and then seeing it appear on all artboards. Just something to keep in mind. The final thing I want to talk about is exporting your artboards when you're done and you want to export designs, because it's not intuitively easy the way it's set up now to export multiple artboards at once. So if you want to export a single artboard, then under the Pixel Studio, the Layout Studio, the Vector Studio, most of these studios up here, you can have this export option up here, but it's only going to apply to the selected artboard. So if I go down here, for example, on logo version 5, and then I come up into the right corner, I find this export, then I can drop down this export here, and I can see the different options here. So here right now, this is called logo version 5, because that's the title of this artboard. I could change that if I want, but I could also come in here and decide whether I want to export a PNG, GIF, JPEG. So I could choose JPEG high quality, something like that. And then I could come in here, change these other settings, fool around with any settings you want. Then I go ahead and choose export. And when I choose export here, it's going to let me choose the location on my computer. I'm going to put it in this export text testing folder and go ahead and save that off. Now, that's just saving off that single artboard. If I open up my file explorer here on this computer and drag it on screen for a second, we'll see that inside that export testing, I just have this logo version 5. And if we look at that thumbnail here, that corresponds with this particular artboard right here. So that's great if I just want to save off one version, but if I have to go through here and click this one and then do this again and click this one and do this again, it's going to be rather time consuming. It would be nice to be able to export everything all at once, all my different artboards to different files, because a lot of times that may be what you want to do. The good news is you can do this, and I'm going to show you how. I just think it's part of the Affinity interface that could be improved. So hopefully they'll improve this going forward so it's a little bit more obvious. But right now, if you want to export multiple artboards at once, what you're going to need to do is you want to come under the Slice Studio. So right now we have the Vector Studio, we have the Pixel Studio, we have Layout Studio, we also have this Slice Studio. Now if you don't see it up here in this sort of studio menu, you might have to use the three dots here and come here, make sure it's turned on like this, and go ahead and turn on the Slice Studio. Then we're going to go under this Slice Studio. You'll notice when we go to the Slice Studio, things change up here in the right corner. So let me just jump back for a second to the Pixel Studio. We see with the Pixel Studio, we just have this one export drop down, and that's just going to be for one artboard. But if we switch now to the Slice Studio, now suddenly we'll see that we have this export options. And what happens here is that you'll notice this sort of blue sort of highlight at the top of each of these artboards. And what is happening is when you go to the Slice Studio, by default, each artboard is going to be turned into a slice. Now, I'm not going to go in depth on what slices are, but basically a slice is a defined area within your design, and by default, when you go to the Slice Studio and launch the Slice Studio, it is going to set up each artboard as a slice, and it's also going to set up one slice. You'll notice here at the top it says logo artboards. It actually does another slice that's all the artboards combined, and we'll see that when we export this in a second. Now, back in the day, if you did web design like around the year 2000, like I was doing, you may have fooled around with something like Macromedia Dreamweaver. That's before Adobe even owned Dreamweaver. It was Macromedia at the time. You had to sort of slice up a website, slice up graphics, and then one of the graphics you might turn into a button. So way back in the day, you might be familiar with the slice tool, but if you haven't done advanced things with graphics like this or web design in the past, maybe you're not familiar with slices. But you don't have to worry about it too much. Just know that each of these artboards now exists as its own entity here under the slice menu, and so does everything all together under this first one, which just says logo artboards. Now that's going to become more apparent here when we go to export this. So let's export this now so you can see how this works. So right up here by default, you have all these export options. If you go under these individually, sort of by clicking on one slice after another, you notice here we have layers. I'm under this slice menu here, under this slice menu. If I just click on any of these, we're going to notice up here, I can go ahead and come down and drop something. So if I wanted this one here to be exported as a PNG, I could do that. But then maybe version 8, I want it to be something different. So that one I'm going to leave as a JPEG, and maybe I'll come down here and change the quality settings, bump it up, bump it down. So you can come in here by clicking on individual ones and sort of setting different presets in terms of what type of file you're going to download if you want to do that. But if you know everything's going to be all the same and you just want to do it quickly, you might select one, shift click to select them all. Then you're going to come up here and suddenly you're adjusting all of these at once. So let's set them all to JPEG. Let's set them all to a quality of like 85, something like that. And so go ahead and we'll do that now. And now if I come down here and we can see export slices, and it's showing me that I have 13 slices selected, I can go ahead and click that. And so I'll click that now. It's going to ask me if I want to save it in this directory. I'm going to go ahead and yes, choose export. And then because we saved this logo version 5 before, and it's using this naming system of using the artboard's names, it's asking me if I want to overwrite that because I exported it as a JPEG previously when we just did one artboard. So do I want to overwrite it? I could choose no, but sure, go ahead. I'll leave that checked on, and we'll go ahead and export that. And then we're going to overwrite that. So if I look at that directory now, so let me bring that back up on screen here, just at export testing, we can see that now we have all these in here. And this first one, as I mentioned, is all the different artboards together. So let me go ahead and open that up now. I'll go ahead here and open up an Affinity. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit File, Open Folder in Explorer, and let's go ahead and bring up this export testing, and I'll open up this one that has all of them here, and we can see actually by default this opened up in Photoshop, but that's okay. We can see that this is a JPEG with all of the different artboards. Now since this is a JPEG, it gave it a white background. If I'd exported this as a PNG, we would see that some of these had a background, other ones had transparency. Of course, if you want that transparency preserved, I would have had to use that that PNG format. So again, all you have to do is come in here under the Slice Studio, select the slices you want to export, adjust your settings up here. They're all going to have that setting if you do this with all of them selected, and then you can choose export. If you want to individually have some of them have a different file format, just come in under those particular ones, highlight just that board, come up here and make your adjustments, and then come down to this export option. Now you'll also notice this continuous option. When you check on continuous, then by default, when you export slices a second time, it's going to automatically overwrite those files that have that naming convention. So if you wanted to continually make updates and continually export these and have the updated version automatically overwrite those versions you saved off before, you might turn continuous on, but I like to not turn it on. That way, when you go to choose export, go ahead and choose export, it's going to give you this warning and make sure that you don't want to overwrite any existing files that might have that name. So I like just having this safety double check. So I tend to not use this continuous. Just know if you do check this on, then it's going to automatically overwrite any files that might have that same name. So go ahead and cancel since we exported already. But this is how you export multiple artboards at once inside of Affinity. You do have to go under the Slice Studio, and then you're going to come under here, make the adjustments, make the selections, and then come down here and choose Export Slices. So this has been all about using artboards in Affinity. I hope you learned something. If you like content like this, you want to learn more about Affinity, graphic design, and other things related to content creation, entrepreneurship, then feel free to subscribe to this channel. And I also have a free newsletter, which I can link down in the first pinned comment below. Thanks again for watching. See you soon.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that. Spitting slow, spitting fast. I could roast, I could gas. Think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past.